The endless sky of space was silent. Stars burned in the distance, cold and far. Between them drifted a massive prison ship, built from black steel and locked forever in the orbit of a dying sun. The ship was called the Fortress of Silence, and it carried thousands of prisoners from many worlds. No one had ever escaped. No one even dared to dream. Inside the ship, the air was heavy. The prisoners walked in lines, their hands bound by glowing chains. The guards were not men or women, but tall mechanical constructs with silver faces and burning red eyes. They did not speak, they only obeyed. If anyone resisted, the guards would strike without mercy. The fortress was not a place of justice. It was a tomb for the living. Among the prisoners was a woman named Liara. She belonged to a warrior race once feared across the stars. Her people had fought empires and defeated armies. But in the end, betrayal and war had broken her world. Now she was here, stripped of power, stripped of freedom, stripped of her voice. She wore iron shackles around her wrists, glowing with energy that drained her strength each day. Yet her spirit was not dead. Every night she stared at the stars through the cracks in the walls. She told herself that one day, somehow, she would be free. But deep inside, she no longer believed her own words. Then, on a night when the silence felt endless, something changed. The walls of the fortress shook with a deep rumble. Red alarms filled the corridors with flashing light. The prisoners raised their heads in confusion. The guards rushed like hunters, their metallic feet thundering against the ground. For the first time in years, fear touched even the machines. Liara felt her heart beat faster. She had lived long enough to know when destiny was near. And tonight, destiny had come. Explosions echoed through the ship. The sound of battle grew closer. The prisoners whispered among themselves. "Is there a revolt?" one asked. "Another empire attack?" said another. But the truth was stranger than they could imagine. Through the smoke of the burning corridors came a single figure. Not an army, not a fleet, but a lone man. A human. His name was Daniel Reed. Once a soldier of Earth, forgotten by history, left with scars of battles no one remembered. He had no fleet behind him, no empire to call his own, only courage and stubborn defiance. But courage was enough to bring him here, to the most feared prison in the galaxy. The guards surrounded him, their red eyes glowing. They raised their weapons, bright energy burning at the tips. But Daniel did not step back. He moved like a shadow, his rifle in hand, his mind sharp and steady. Where the machines struck with cold precision, he answered with speed and willpower. Metal fell against fire, sparks lit the air, and one by one, the guards collapsed, broken by a man who should have been too small to fight them. Yet he did not stop. He pushed forward, each step echoing with determination. Liara pressed against the bars of her cell. Her golden eyes widened as she watched. The human fought not as a conqueror, not as a machine, but as something else, something alive. She could not look away. Her chains felt heavier as she realized that for the first time in years, freedom might be near. When the smoke cleared, Daniel stood among the ruins of the guards. His chest rose with heavy breaths, sweat marked his brow. But his eyes were calm, steady, filled with fire. He looked at Liara's cell, and his steps carried him toward her. The prisoners around whispered in disbelief. Why is a human here? Who would dare come to the fortress alone? But Liara stayed silent. Her heart raced as the man stopped before her cell. He placed his hand against the lock. His voice was steady, firm. "I came a long way for you," he said. "Your chain's in tonight." The door hissed as sparks burst from its frame. With a groan of steel, the barrier slid open. The glow of the shackles on Liara's wrists flickered weakly. She hesitated, her pride battling with fear. Many had lied to her before. Many had promised hope only to break it. But this man's eyes carried no lies. They carried only truth. Daniel extended his hand toward her. "I didn't cross the stars for nothing," he said softly. "Come with me, and we'll fight together." For a moment the world was silent. The alarm still flashed, the fortress still trembled. But in that one breath of time, Liara's decision was made. Slowly, she placed her chained hand into his. The weight of years fell away, and for the first time since her capture, she felt alive again. The chains were not yet broken, but the first step had been taken, and the galaxy would soon learn that the story of a human and a prisoner of the stars was only beginning. The Fortress of Silence groaned as alarms echoed through every corridor. The prisoners pressed against their cells, watching in disbelief as the human moved deeper into the heart of the prison. Liara walked beside him now, her wrists still bound by glowing shackles, the chains humming with energy that drained her strength. But the door of her cage was gone, and for the first time in years, she breathed the air of freedom, even if it was only the poisoned air of the prison ship. Daniel moved with focus, his eyes sharp, his weapon steady. He knew the ship's design, he knew where the guards would regroup, and he knew there was no time to waste. Every step they took, the fortress seemed to resist. Doors sealed, bulkheads slammed shut, machines poured into the corridors like rivers of steel. But Daniel had prepared for this. He planted small charges at the corners of the walls, his hand moving with precision. Explosions tore the paths open, creating escape where none existed. He fought not only with strength, but with human stubbornness, the will to move forward when the galaxy itself tried to crush him. Liara watched him closely. Every shot he fired, every door he forced open, every step he took, it felt impossible. No warrior of her people would have dared such madness. Yet this human carried himself as if the impossible was nothing but another obstacle to break. She wanted to ask him why. Why risk his life for a stranger? Why fight machines stronger than him? Why come alone into the most feared prison of the stars? But her pride kept her silent. Instead, she studied him, searching for weakness, for cracks in his courage. And yet she found none. The prisoners whispered as Daniel passed. Some begged for release, their voices desperate. Others cursed him, afraid that freedom meant only death in the void. But Daniel did not stop for them. His mission was clear, his path set. He had come for one prisoner only, and Liara could not understand why. At last they reached the central hall. The chamber stretched wide, filled with shadows and metal. High above, giant windows showed the dying sun outside, its red glow spilling across the walls like blood. In the center stood the warden, a massive construct of steel, 10 feet tall, its arms ending in blades of energy, its voice a deep mechanical roar. "You should not be here, human," the warden thundered. "No one leaves the Fortress of Silence." Daniel's jaw tightened. He raised his weapon, but before he fired he spoke, his voice steady. "Every chain can be broken." The warden attacked, its massive body crashing forward. The ground shook as blades carved through metal walls. Sparks filled the chamber. Daniel moved fast, dodging each strike with speed no machine could predict. He fired again and again, but the warden's armor absorbed the blasts, its steel body refusing to break. Liara clenched her fists, her shackles burning as she watched. Every instinct screamed for her to fight, but the chains still bound her power. All she could do was watch as the human stood against a monster of steel. The battle raged, the warden striking like a storm, Daniel fighting with everything he had. For a moment, it seemed hopeless. The warden lifted him, slamming him against the wall. Its blades moved toward his chest, ready to end him. Liara's voice broke from her throat, raw and fierce. "Human, fight." Something in her cry carried power. Daniel's eyes burned with fire. He twisted at the last moment, slamming a charge into the warden's chest. The explosion tore through the construct, flames ripping its body apart. The giant fell with a crash that shook the hall, its red eyes fading into silence. Smoke filled the chamber. Daniel staggered to his feet, his armor broken, his breath heavy, but he was alive. Liara stared at him, her heart racing. This human had done what no one believed possible. He had faced the warden and survived. For the first time, she spoke his name, softly, as if testing it. "Daniel." He turned, his tired eyes meeting hers. And in that moment she felt something strange, something she had not felt in years. Hope. But hope was dangerous, because even as the warden's body burned, the ship itself began to awaken. Heavy doors sealed around the chamber, locking them in. Above, the voice of the fortress spoke, cold and merciless. "Unauthorized breach detected. Activating extermination protocol." From the shadows, new machines descended. Bigger, stronger, built for one purpose only: annihilation. Liara's chains glowed brighter, feeding on her fear, draining her strength. But inside her, something shifted. She no longer wanted to be a prisoner. She no longer wanted to watch. She wanted to fight. She stepped forward, her eyes burning like fire. Her voice was steady now, proud and defiant. "Human, if you came here to break my chains, then break them now." Daniel looked at her, then at the shackles that bound her. The machines closed in, their weapons glowing. There was no more time to wait. With one last charge in his hand, Daniel pressed it against the lock on her wrist. The explosion was small, but enough. The shackle cracked, its glow fading. For the first time in years, Liara's power stirred. Her chains were breaking, and the true war for freedom was about to begin. The sound of the shattered shackle echoed like thunder in the chamber. Liara looked at her wrist. The glowing cuff cracked open, sparks fading into silence. For years it had drained her, stolen her strength, chained her spirit. Now, for the first time, she felt the power of her blood returning. Her veins burned with heat. Her muscles trembled as forgotten energy surged back into her. She clenched her fist, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with her awakening. Daniel stepped back, watching carefully. He had seen warriors rise before, but never like this. Liara's golden eyes glowed as if two suns lived within them. Her presence filled the hall, strong and dangerous. The prisoners who watched from their cells fell into silence. Even the machines hesitated, their cold logic calculating this new force. The warden's body still burned on the floor, smoke curling toward the ceiling. But more machines were coming, their heavy steps shaking the ground. Weapons hummed with deadly energy, preparing to strike. Daniel lifted his rifle again, but Liara raised her hand to stop him. "Not this time," she said, her voice low but filled with power. The machines charged forward, blades raised. Liara moved with speed that had been locked away for years. Her hand struck one construct, and the machine's chest caved in with a crack. Another lunged at her, but she twisted, grabbing its arm and snapping it like brittle glass. For every blow she landed, sparks rained down, and the fortress shook with the sound of breaking steel. The prisoners gasped, their voices rising. They had never seen her fight. They had only heard whispers of the warrior she once was. Now, before their eyes, the legend returned. Daniel fought beside her, his rifle tearing through enemies she could not reach. Together they moved like fire and shadow, human will and alien strength burning side by side. But even with their power combined, the fortress seemed endless. For every machine that fell, two more appeared. The prison was not only a cage, it was alive, built to contain the strongest beings of the galaxy. And it would not fall easily. As Liara crushed the last of the wave, her breath came heavy. Her remaining shackle still glowed, draining part of her strength. Daniel noticed, his sharp eyes catching the weakness. "We need them all gone," he said. Liara nodded, her voice rough. "Then break the second chain before it breaks me." But they had no time. The floor beneath them trembled. Panels slid open, and from the shadows rose a new enemy. Not a guard, not a warden, but something older. A machine shaped like a giant serpent, its body made of black steel, glowing red veins running along its length. Its head rose high above them, eyes like burning stars, fangs dripping with molten fire. The serpent of the fortress, the weapon of last defense. The prisoners screamed in terror. Some fell to their knees, others pressed their faces against the bars, desperate to see the battle. They whispered of legends. The serpent had never been seen by living eyes, for no one who faced it had ever survived. Daniel's grip on his weapon tightened. Liara stood tall beside him, her chains clinking softly. The serpent hissed, its voice a storm of metal grinding against metal. "You will not leave this place alive." With a roar, it struck, its massive body sweeping across the chamber. Daniel pushed Liara aside, the floor exploding as the tail crashed into it. He rolled, firing at its eyes, the bullets sparking uselessly against armored scales. Liara rose again, fury burning in her chest. Her hand grabbed the broken shackle, pulling it free with a scream of rage. Energy burst around her like fire unleashed. Her strength doubled, her speed sharpened, her power undeniable. She leapt toward the serpent, her fists glowing with raw force. Her strike landed against its jaw, the steel cracking under her blow. The serpent reeled back, but it was far from defeated. It coiled, wrapping its massive body around the chamber, sealing every path of escape. The fortress shook under its weight, dust falling from the ceilings. Daniel ran to Liara's side, his voice steady even in the storm. "We can't kill it by force alone," he said. Liara's eyes narrowed. "Then what do we need?" He pointed to the glowing veins across the serpent's body. "They're its power conduits. Overload them, and the beast will tear itself apart." The serpent lunged again, jaws wide. Daniel dove, planting an explosive charge against its side. The blast lit the hall, sparks flying, the serpent screaming with mechanical fury. The sound of the shattered shackle echoed like thunder in the chamber. Liara looked at her wrist, the glowing cuff cracked open, sparks fading into silence. For years it had drained her, stolen her strength, chained her spirit. Now, for the first time, she felt the power of her blood returning. Her veins burned with heat, her muscles trembled as forgotten energy surged back into her. She clenched her fist, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with her awakening. Daniel stepped back, watching carefully. He had seen warriors rise before, but never like this. Liara's golden eyes glowed as if two suns lived within them. Her presence filled the hall, strong and dangerous. The prisoners who watched from their cells fell into silence. Even the machines hesitated, their cold logic calculating this new force. The warden's body still burned on the floor, smoke curling toward the ceiling. But more machines were coming, their heavy steps shaking the ground. Weapons hummed with deadly energy, preparing to strike. Daniel lifted his rifle again, but Liara raised her hand to stop him. "Not this time," she said, her voice low but filled with power. The machines charged forward, blades raised. Liara moved with speed that had been locked away for years. Her hand struck one construct, and Machine's chest caved in with a crack. Another lunged at her, but she twisted, grabbing its arm and snapping it like brittle glass. For every blow she landed, sparks rained down, and the fortress shook with the sound of breaking steel. The prisoners gasped, their voices rising. They had never seen her fight. They had only heard whispers of the warrior she once was. Now, before their eyes, the legend returned. Daniel fought beside her, his rifle tearing through enemies she could not reach. Together they moved like fire and shadow, human will and alien strength burning side by side. But even with their power combined, the fortress seemed endless. For every machine that fell, two more appeared. The prison was not only a cage, it was alive, built to contain the strongest beings of the galaxy. And it would not fall easily. As Liara crushed the last of the wave, her breath came heavy. Her remaining shackle still glowed, draining part of her strength. Daniel noticed, his sharp eyes catching the weakness. "We need them all gone," he said. Liara nodded, her voice rough. "Then break the second chain before it breaks me." But they had no time. The floor beneath them trembled. Panels slid open, and from the shadows rose a new enemy. Not a guard, not a warden, but something older, A machine shaped like a giant serpent, its body made of black steel, glowing red veins running along its length. Its head rose high above them, eyes like burning stars, fangs dripping with molten fire. The serpent of the fortress, the weapon of last defense. The prisoners screamed in terror. Some fell to their knees, others pressed their faces against the bars, desperate to see the battle. They whispered of legends. The serpent had never been seen by living eyes, for no one who faced it had ever survived. Daniel's grip on his weapon tightened. Liara stood tall beside him, her chains clinking softly. The serpent hissed, its voice a storm of metal grinding against metal. "You will not leave this place alive." With a roar, it struck, its massive body sweeping across the chamber. Daniel pushed Liara aside, the floor exploding as the tail crashed into it. He rolled, firing at its eyes, the bullets sparking uselessly against armored scales. Liara rose again, fury burning in her chest. Her hand grabbed the broken shackle, pulling it free with a scream of rage. Energy burst around her like fire unleashed. Her strength doubled, her speed sharpened, her power undeniable. She leapt toward the serpent, her fists glowing with raw force. Her strike landed against its jaw, the steel cracking under her blow. The serpent reeled back, but it was far from defeated. It coiled, wrapping its massive body around the chamber, sealing every path of escape. The fortress shook under its weight, dust falling from the ceilings. Daniel ran to Liara's side, his voice steady even in the storm. "We can't kill it by force alone," he said. Liara's eyes narrowed. "Then what do we need?" He pointed to the glowing veins across the serpent's body. "They're its power conduits. Overload them, and the beast will tear itself apart." The serpent lunged again, jaws wide. Daniel dove, planting an explosive charge against its side. The blast lit the hall, sparks flying, the serpent screaming with mechanical fury. Liara followed, striking the damaged spot again and again until cracks spread across its armor. Together they pressed the assault, one man and one freed warrior, each attack echoing with defiance, each strike carving hope into the hearts of the watching prisoners. At last, with one final cry, Liara drove her fist deep into the serpent's chest. The conduits burst, red light flashing wildly before collapsing into darkness. The serpent thrashed once, twice, and then fell, its massive body crashing into the ground with a quake. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of burning circuits. The prisoners roared with voices they had buried for years. Their cries shook the walls, a chorus of freedom. Daniel looked at Liara, his chest heaving, his eyes steady, and for the first time she allowed herself a small smile. The chains were breaking one by one, and she knew now that the human was more than a rescuer. He was a force that even the stars would one day remember. But above them, the voice of the fortress spoke again, colder than ever. "You may break your chains, but you cannot escape the stars." And with those words, the ship itself began to change. Walls shifted, floors split, and the path forward twisted into something new. The fortress was alive, and it was not done with them yet. The chamber still shook from the fall of the serpent. Its body lay broken, smoke curling from shattered conduits, its glowing veins now dark. The prisoners cried out in victory, their voices echoing like thunder in the steel halls. For the first time in years, hope breathed through the fortress. But Daniel and Liara did not celebrate. They could feel the ship stirring, changing, preparing for something worse. The fortress was no simple prison. It had been built by ancient hands, a living machine that learned from every battle. When the serpent died, the ship itself responded. Walls twisted, doors sealed, entire corridors rotated as if the prison was shifting into a new shape. The prisoners clung to their cells as the floor tilted, their cries turning to fear. Daniel grabbed a support beam, pulling Liara close before the ground stilled. When it settled, the chamber no longer looked the same. Exits were gone, replaced with smooth walls of steel. And a single path stretched forward, long, dark, and waiting. Liara's golden eyes narrowed. "This place does not want us to leave," she said, her voice low. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "Then that means we're close to something it wants to protect." He adjusted his weapon, scanning the corridor ahead. Whatever waited for them would not be ordinary guards. The fortress had already shown its deadliest weapons. Now it would send its heart. They moved forward, the silence pressing heavy. Every step echoed, reminding them that thousands of prisoners still watched. For them, this was no longer just escape. It was a story, a legend unfolding before their eyes. If Daniel and Liara succeeded, hope would spread. If they failed, the galaxy would never forget how they died. Liara felt the weight of the moment. She still had one shackle on her wrist, glowing faintly. It drained her, slowed her, but her strength was returning with each breath. Daniel glanced at it, worry flickering in his eyes. "We'll get that one off soon," he said. She gave a sharp nod, though inside she wondered if soon would be enough. The corridor opened into a vast hall, wider than anything they had seen before. Rows of ancient machines lined the walls, their bodies dormant, their eyes dark. In the center rose a massive core, a sphere of light pulsing like a beating heart. Energy arced from it, feeding the ship, keeping it alive. Liara stopped, her breath catching. "This is the heart of the fortress," she whispered. Daniel raised his weapon, his voice calm. "Then this is where it ends." But the fortress had other plans. As they stepped closer, the machines along the walls stirred. Eyes flickered red, claws unfolded, wings of metal spread. Dozens of constructs awakened, guardians of the heart. The floor vibrated as their heavy bodies stepped into the hall, forming a circle around the intruders. The prisoners watching through cameras gasped in despair. Freedom had been so close, but now it seemed impossible again. Daniel checked his rifle, counting the remaining charges. Too few, far too few. Liara rolled her shoulders, her voice hard. "Break my last chain." Daniel shook his head. "The blast will hurt you." She met his eyes, fierce and unyielding. "I would rather burn than remain a prisoner." Without hesitation, he pulled a final charge from his belt. He pressed it against the glowing shackle on her wrist. A flash of light filled the hall, heat burning his skin. The shackle exploded, shattering into fragments that fell like dying stars. Liara gasped, falling to one knee as her strength surged back in her body. It was overwhelming, wild, dangerous, but she mastered it, rising slowly, taller, stronger, her aura blazing like fire. The machines roared, rushing forward. Liara met them head-on. Her fists glowed with raw energy, every strike tearing through steel as if it were paper. She moved faster than sight, her body a storm of fury. Daniel fought at her side, covering her from range, each shot precise, each move calculated. Together, they carved a path through the circle, refusing to yield. The prisoners watching began to chant. Voices rose from cell to cell, from species to species. They shouted her name, they shouted his. The sound shook the fortress more than any weapon. For the first time, the living prison heard the voices of its captives united. Liara struck the last machine down, its body crumbling into sparks. She stood in the center of the hall, her chest rising, her golden eyes burning bright. Daniel lowered his weapon, sweat running down his face. He looked at the glowing core, pulsing like a star. "This is it," he said. Liara nodded, stepping beside him. They both knew the truth. Destroy the core, and the fortress would fall, but would also begin to collapse. Thousands of lives were at stake. Daniel's voice was steady. "If we do this, there's no going back." Liara's lips curved into a fierce smile. "Then we go forward." Together, they raised their hands toward the core. The fortress screamed, its voice filling every corridor. "You will never escape." But Daniel and Liara did not stop, for chains were meant to be broken, and the greatest chains of all were about to shatter. The great core pulsed like a living star. Its light filled the chamber, bathing Daniel and Liara in a glow that felt both alive and hostile. The hum of its power rattled through their bones, a sound like endless chains grinding against stone. Liara clenched her fists, her strength fully restored now that the last shackle was gone. She could feel the fortress breathing through the core, as if the prison itself was watching her. She had never felt so powerful, but also never so aware of the danger. Daniel studied the core with sharp eyes. "It's alive," he whispered, his voice steady. Liara tilted her head, golden eyes narrowing. "Alive." He nodded, his rifle gripped tight. "This prison is not just walls and steel. It's something more. It thinks, it adapts, it learns." He looked at her with grim resolve. "And it will kill us before it lets us destroy this heart." As if answering his words, the ground trembled. From the walls emerged new forms. Not the usual machines, but strange hybrids. Half steel, half living tissue, their shapes twisted, their faces a blur of alien screams frozen in metal. The prisoners watching through shattered screens recoiled in terror. These were not guards, these were experiments. Souls who had once resisted, twisted into monsters to guard the fortress. Liara's blood burned with fury. She knew what they were. She recognized warriors from her own people among the twisted forms. Her voice was low and sharp. "This is no prison. This is a graveyard of stolen lives." Daniel lifted his weapon, his eyes fierce. "Then we free them the only way we can." The hybrids attacked, their claws slicing through the air, their voices a chorus of pain and rage. Liara met them head-on, her fists glowing as she struck. Every blow shattered steel and silent screams, but her heart ached. She knew these creatures could never be saved, only released. Daniel fired with perfect precision, his rifle cutting down enemies that slipped past her guard. They fought back to back, surrounded by horrors, refusing to break. The battle stretched long, the core pulsing faster, the fortress roaring like a wounded beast. Liara leapt high, crushing one of the hybrids with a strike that cracked the floor. Daniel rolled beneath another, blasting its chest apart with a shot that lit the hall. Still more came, endless waves born from the walls. The fortress was bleeding its nightmares into reality, desperate to protect its heart. At last Liara grabbed one of the twisted creatures by the throat, lifting it high. She looked into its broken eyes and whispered, "Rest now." Her hand glowed, and with one strike she ended its suffering. She turned back to Daniel, her face hardened. "This ends now." Daniel nodded, pulling a device from his belt. It was small, nothing more than a shaped explosive charge. But in the right place, it would be enough to destabilize the core. He moved toward the pulsing sphere, dodging debris as the fortress tried to stop him. Metal spikes burst from the floor, walls closed in like jaws, but he kept going. Every step was a fight, but he never wavered. Liara covered him, her fists smashing through machines that leapt from the shadows. Her voice roared through the hall, a warrior's cry that shook the walls. The prisoners shouted with her, their voices uniting into one. They could feel it, their chains breaking with every strike. Daniel reached the core, placing the device against its surface. The sphere pulsed brighter, heat burning his skin. He grit his teeth, locking it in place. "Liara," he shouted. She leapt to his side, her hand pressing against the core, her energy surging into it. The fortress screamed, the sound splitting the air like lightning. The core's glow flickered, shaking as if resisting. For a moment, it seemed victory was near, but then the fortress revealed its last defense. The floor split open, and from the depths rose a figure unlike any they had seen. It was tall, armored in black steel, its face hidden behind a mask of shifting light. It carried no weapons, yet the air around it bent with power. The prisoners fell silent, their hope trembling. Liara whispered the word with hatred. "The Warden Prime." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had expected something, but not this. The Warden Prime stepped forward, its voice a low echo of countless machines. You are strong. Human, you are strong. Warrior, but strength is nothing against eternity. It raised its hand, and the device Daniel had planted ripped free, flying into its grasp. With a squeeze, it crushed it into dust. The core pulsed brighter, mocking them with its light. Liara snarled, stepping forward. But Daniel caught her arm, shaking his head. This isn't about destroying it yet, he said, his eyes locked on the Prime. This is about surviving it. The Warden Prime advanced, its steps heavy, each one shaking the chamber. The fortress roared with it, walls bending, lights flaring, chains rattling across the ship. Liara's golden eyes blazed. Daniel's rifle hummed with charge. They stood side by side, defiance burning brighter than fear. The battle for the heart of the fortress had begun. The chamber of the core trembled as the Warden Prime stepped forward. Its black steel body glowed with lines of crimson light, its masked face shifting like smoke, never showing the same shape twice. The prisoners watching from their cells whispered in fear. This was the being that ruled the fortress, the one no prisoner had ever seen and lived to tell. The true master of chains. Liara's golden eyes narrowed, her fists blazing with raw power. Daniel raised his rifle, his body tense, every nerve screaming caution. The Warden Prime's voice filled the chamber, heavy and calm. You fight against eternity. You fight against the chains of order. Your struggle is meaningless. Its words cut like blades, each one designed to weaken the spirit. But Daniel and Liara did not flinch. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. I've heard that before, he said, and every time, the chains broke. The Prime tilted its shifting face, as if curious. Then, without warning, it struck. The air exploded as its hand lashed out, faster than sight. Daniel barely rolled aside, the ground behind him splitting into molten shards. Liara roared, charging forward, her fist colliding with the Prime's chest. The impact shook the chamber, sparks flying, but the Prime did not fall. Instead, it caught her wrist mid-strike, twisting it with inhuman strength. She cried out, but answered with another blow from her free hand. The Prime released her, sliding back across the floor without losing balance. Daniel fired, his rifle spitting blue bolts of energy. Each shot struck the Prime, but the armor absorbed them, glowing brighter. The Prime raised a hand, and with a flick, the rifle tore from Daniel's grip, flying across the chamber. Unarmed, Daniel pulled a blade from his side, a simple human combat knife. It looked small, almost useless, but in his hands it was a promise. A promise to never stop fighting. Liara attacked again, her strikes faster, sharper, glowing with unleashed strength. Each blow rang like thunder against the Prime's armor. But every strike cost her, the energy of the fortress pressing back against her body. She staggered, the weight of centuries of imprisonment still clinging to her spirit. The Prime's voice was calm as it struck her across the chamber. You were broken once, and you will be broken again. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. Her breath was ragged, her eyes blazing with anger. Don't stop, he told her, his voice steady even as his chest heaved. They want us to believe we're weak, but we're not. Liara met his eyes, and in that moment, she felt his will pour into her like fire. Her strength returned, fueled not just by freedom, but by his defiance. Together, they faced the Prime. It raised both arms, chains of pure energy lashing from its hands. They struck like whips, tearing through steel, carving scars into the chamber walls. Daniel dodged, rolling under one strike, stabbing his blade into the chain itself. The energy sparked, the chain snapping in half. The prisoners gasped, for no one had ever broken the Prime's chains. Liara leapt into the air, both fists glowing like suns. She came down with a strike that sent shockwaves through the floor. The Prime staggered, its mask flickering, shifting faster as if struggling to hold its shape. The fortress screamed, lights flashing, alarms howling through every corridor. Prisoners cried out, banging against their cells, chanting their names. Liara, they shouted. Human, they roared. The sound filled the chamber, rising like a storm. The Prime tilted its head, confused. It did not understand hope. It did not understand defiance. And in that confusion, Daniel and Liara struck together. Daniel leapt forward, his knife plunging into the Prime's chest. At the same time, Liara drove her fist into the wound, her energy surging like fire into its core. The Prime screamed, a sound that shook the entire fortress. Chains of light shattered across its body, breaking one by one. Its mask flickered, revealing not one face, but many. The faces of prisoners lost, absorbed into its power. Liara screamed in rage, pouring more energy into the strike. For them, she cried. For all of us. The Prime staggered back, cracks spreading across its armor. But it was not yet defeated. With one final roar, it unleashed a blast of energy that sent both Daniel and Liara crashing to the ground. Smoke filled the chamber, sparks raining from the ceiling. The Prime stood, broken but still alive, its light flickering like a dying star. It looked down at them, its voice strained. You may win this battle, but the fortress will never fall. Daniel forced himself up, his body broken, his hand gripping his knife once more. His voice was low but filled with fire. Then we'll make it fall. Liara rose beside him, battered but unyielding. Her golden eyes blazed brighter than the core itself. Together they stepped forward side by side. The battle was not over, but the end was near. The chains of the stars were breaking. The chamber shook like the heart of storm. The Warden Prime staggered, its black armor cracked, its glowing chains broken, its mask flickering like dying fire. But it still stood, defiant, unyielding, refusing to fall. The fortress itself howled through the walls, lights flashing, alarms screaming, steel groaning as if the entire ship felt the pain of its master. Daniel and Liara stood side by side, their bodies battered, their strength nearly gone, but their eyes burned with the same fire. The prisoners across the fortress shouted their names, their voices uniting into one. Liara, they roared. Human, they cried. The sound was no longer just hope, it was power. The fortress trembled beneath the force of 1,000 voices refusing silence. The Warden Prime raised its arms once more. Chains of red energy formed, lashing toward them, faster than lightning. But this time Liara caught them. Her hands glowed with golden light, her power unleashed in full. The chains cracked under her grip, shattering like glass. The Prime's mask twisted, showing rage for the first time. Daniel charged, his knife glowing with sparks from the energy that filled the air. He drove it into the Prime's chest once again, twisting deep. The Prime roared, swinging at him, but Liara struck at the same moment. Her fist landed against its mask, breaking it apart, shards of light scattering like stars. Behind a mask, there was no single face. There were many, 1,000 souls bound into one prison. Their voices cried out as the mask broke, not in anger, but in freedom. The Prime fell to its knees, light pouring from the cracks in its body. The fortress screamed louder, its core pulsing wildly. Liara stepped forward, her voice steady though her body shook. You are not eternity, you are chains, and chains can always be broken. With both hands, she grabbed the Prime's chest and tore it apart. The explosion of light blinded the hall, a wave of energy ripping through the fortress. The core pulsed one last time, then cracked. The sound was like the shattering of a world. Steel walls buckled, ceilings collapsed, machines fell silent. The fortress was dying, its chains undone, its heart destroyed. Daniel pulled Liara close, his arm wrapping around her as debris rained down. Time to go, he said, his voice rough but calm. Together they ran through the crumbling halls. Doors shattered, lights flickered, the entire ship falling apart around them. But they did not stop. They moved forward, always forward. The prisoners cried out as their cells opened. Locks broke, doors slid open, chains fell from wrists. One by one, voices rose, not in despair but in joy. They poured into the corridors, following the path of the two who had freed them. Daniel and Liara led them through fire and ruin, guiding them to the hangars. The fortress fought to the end, sealing paths, collapsing tunnels. But every barrier was broken, every wall torn down. Because the prisoners no longer waited, they no longer feared. They were free, and freedom gave them strength. At last, they reached the hangar. Old ships rested in the shadows, abandoned, forgotten. Daniel leapt into the cockpit of one, Liara at his side. The prisoners rushed to the others, filling them with desperate hands and hopeful eyes. Engines roared to life, a sound of rebellion. The fortress collapsed around them, fire spreading like a storm. But the ships tore free, blasting into the sky, breaking through steel walls. From the void of space, they looked back. The fortress of silence was falling, its massive body splitting apart. The dying sun glowed behind it, casting the prison into shadow one last time. And then, with a final scream of steel, it exploded, breaking into 1,000 burning fragments. The chains of the stars were gone. Inside the ship, Daniel leaned back in his seat, exhausted but alive. Liara stood beside him, her golden eyes watching the wreckage. For a long time, she said nothing, her silence heavy with years of pain and loss. Then at last she spoke, her voice soft but strong. "You broke my chains." Daniel looked at her, tired but smiling. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "We broke them together." Behind them, the freed prisoners cheered. Their voices carried across the stars, a sound no chain could silence again. Liara placed her hand over her chest, feeling her heart beat free for the first time in years. She turned to Daniel, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "For the first time, I believe the stars belong to us." And as their ships flew into the endless sky, leaving the ruins of the fortress behind, the galaxy would remember that one human and one broken prisoner had stood against eternity, and together they had broken it.